I read a post from Anna Xavier on LinkedIn about wanting to meet up with some ladies and some non-binaries and all sorts of people while she's in London. So I thought I'd ask Anna all about it. But before we get to that, because we've already been discussing a fantastic episode of the podcast space that's come out this week, where Anna describes 10 sort of essentials for podcasting. I just thought it would be interesting to get what the idea was and what you were thinking of coming up with that episode. Was it really difficult as well to then knuckle down to specifically what you needed to get across?
First off, thank you for having me. It's funny because, having produced podcasts since 2008, a lot of my clients always come up with a lot of limiting beliefs in their heads about what a podcast should be. And, maybe we need to take a break and maybe I can't do it. So it's all of these kind of restrictions that they experience. Some of them are real, right? One of the examples that I give on the episode was how one of my clients, her husband has had a series of strokes. And so we had to completely change what her content strategy was like. So that is always something that is on my mind. How can we do more with less? And so over the years, I've just gathered ideas around how can we repurpose the content that we're creating, especially as podcasters. If you are a business owner, you have so much going on and you have to be strategic about what do you talk about and how do you present that information in a way that feels exciting? Because if we're going to have a podcast for the longest time, we will get bored of the things we do. So we have to innovate. But a lot of times we overcomplicate what that innovation needs to be.
Yeah.
We kind of level up what the expectation is. So we say, I need more cameras. I need more. And what if we do the opposite? What if we take? So we take out the expectation of having to do more. So over the summer, I don't know how you feel, but normally the heat makes me feel like I don't want to do as much. And so I start thinking about, instead of an episode that is 30 minutes, even though ironically that episode is longer, what I envisioned for these series for season 5, it was how can I do episodes that are under 15 minutes, under 10 minutes, and how can I give people ideas about what's possible for them?
Yeah, the 10 that you mention, I think are absolutely perfect pointers for people to go to. And I was saying to you that for me personally, the 10th one was something that I hadn't thought of. And I don't know why, considering that I do a show where I'm trying to promote podcasters, why I've not done this before, which is to edit sections of episodes of other people's shows that you've guested on. Mm-hmm. And then put that out as a part of your own product. And it makes really good sense to do that. And I can't believe that I missed that idea before now.
It makes sense because when I'm thinking about being on a show, we think about collaboration. So we think about replaying the whole episode. We think about maybe teasing 30 seconds of it. But what I've come to realize is that when we're guests on someone else's podcast, we often talk about things that we don't often talk about on our own show. Yeah. And so I always think about how exciting it is for listeners to think about us in a way that is kind of, and I know some people may roll their eyes as I say this, as celebrities. But then one of my listeners of the podcast, she says, whenever you share episodes you've been a guest on your newsletter, I always go and listen. And I was like, okay, tell me more. And so just kind of to confirm this idea around, she's like, you were asked things that you normally don't talk about because you're normally focused on creating educational content, helping the listener through, but it's not often that we hear your whole story or your story in a way that brings a little bit of a different side of your expertise or how you got to where you are right now. And so we forget that personal side that we have is what bonds us to the listeners, right? And so there were always, whenever I'm being a guest, and I always tell my clients this, when you're being interviewed, you sometimes prep, because normally if you're doing a whole episode, you're spending, 15, 20 minutes going into a whole point. But those segments, sometimes that question is asked and then the answer is very polished. It's really, really good self-contained answer. And so you can use that answer or that whole section to kind of display your expertise in a way that you're the guest. So you're only focused on answering. You're not thinking about tech issues. Is the guest comfortable? Do I have everything under control? And so even in a way, the energy you present is completely different because you're just kind of more at ease. So it really shows better ways to display your expertise or your story in a way where you just maybe sometimes don't get to talk about it on your day-to-day because you think, oh, I've said this 1,000 times. And you have not. Most times not. You haven't told your audience enough because they may not have listened to that episode or got distracted during this section. So it's always good to keep that in mind.
Yeah. Plus, who we are ourselves individually with what we do, the work that we do in podcasting, we are trying to promote independent podcasters and our friends who make podcasts anyway. Mm-hmm. So it makes sense that we would do this, that we would put these clips into our own shows and promote these other people's shows, because that's what we are doing anyway in our everyday lives.
Absolutely. And, I always think about when we're creating a podcast, obviously we're stronger together, but how many times were you listening to a podcast and like, oh man, I really wanted this episode in my life, 6 months ago, I really needed this. So think about it as a service that you're doing to the listener to connect them with maybe their next favorite podcast. And we know data tells us that people can only consume, depending on where you are, 6 to 8 different shows per week. So people's capacity is very limited. And so when we think about presenting a show, we really need to be keeping in mind that we're kind of the gatekeepers of our listeners. Yep. And so we should only recommend things that we truly are excited to share and not just like, oh, well, it's a favor. They did the same for me. It's just like, okay, how can we present it in a way? For instance, that segment, if we think about like, oh, maybe the episode was a little all over the place. I've been a guest on shows where the host was a little too distracted. It has happened to all of us. Either we had a difficult day or we were so starstruck with the guests that we have. They were like, oh my God, like I couldn't keep it together. And so sometimes that is like a really good kind of preview. And so the person may go and say, oh, the topic of this podcast is really interesting. Maybe I will not listen to that interview, but I'll listen to other interviews from that same person. So it's kind of a way to make sure that we are creating a standard in the relationship that we have with our listeners and maintaining that throughout. Everything we do, we have to keep that in mind. We are the keepers of our listeners.
That's fantastic. Basically, what I meant by that was the fact that we both are people who have got so much from podcast and listening to podcasts. This is our way of giving back to them and thanking them for what they've given to us by providing this information and doing this for them.
Yeah.
So speaking of podcasters, you're over in England at the moment.
I am.
And you are in London, where we all were less than a month and a half ago for the podcast show.
I know.
It seems so long ago in a way as well.
It does. And you know what? I have a friend of mine that works right across the business center. So I was like, oh, walking by and I'm like, hello, those good old times. Like it feels like it was forever just living those moments, even though there was like a conference about something else that was there. But I was like, no, I miss it so much. But Martin, I used to live in London years and years ago, over 10 years ago. And so for me, it's really interesting to come in because 10 years ago, there was no podcasting scene really. It was very like indie. You had all of these online radio stations in London that would do like a hybrid of live broadcasting with podcasts being hosted on Mixcloud and SoundCloud and on people's websites as well. And it's so interesting for me to come back and to think how much the scene has changed, how much the community has grown and evolved. And I'm just so in awe of all the amazing projects. And I've met so many people since. I've been coming back for 3 years in a row for the podcast show. And we didn't get to meet in person. I guess I think I saw you kind of in the distance, but it is what it is. Like that's actually our invitation to everybody listening. Please make sure that you go to podcast conferences. They're so fun. You will get so much out of them. You strengthen your relationships with podcasters. You learn so much. I think it's important to acknowledge that we need to make time for the things that matter to us. And so maybe that depends on your financial situation, but many people that we know that's their vacation, right? Like they go around the world going to podcast conferences, and that accounts to what would be their vacation because it's such a different experience coming to London than being in the US, being in Portugal, Spain, France. Like every conference has its own vibe. But it is so important to actually attend them, because there will be a before you attending podcast conferences, and there'll be an after you after attending those conferences.
Yes. So while you are over here in London,
Yes,
you want to meet up with people and get together?
Yes. So I've organized podcast meetups. I'm originally from Portugal. I've been gone for about 15 years. A couple of weeks ago, I organized a podcaster meetup. It was so fun. I grabbed two people from back home. They're also in the podcast industry. And I was like, okay, guys, let's do this. And even though I'm not living somewhere, I think that is important for people to feel like they're part of a community. And still today, I hear from them. So I was like, I'm going to be in London for about a month and a half. I went to actually get in touch with more the podcast community and strengthen the connections that I have. I find that as a woman who is an immigrant in the US, I find that a lot of the opportunities that have come around is because I decided to do things. And so, I've organized meetups with Riverside back in Dallas when I lived in Dallas. And so I think it's important to model behaviors. And so a lot of women don't go to podcast conferences or podcast events because they're like, oh, I'm too busy, or I can't possibly make time, or I can't afford it. And while many of those concerns are super valid, again, going back into the feeling and the expertise, right? You get to talk to someone that they may have expertise on something that you've been trying to wreck your head around to figure out, and they just tell you, and you then maybe go out and grab a coffee with that person and you become besties. In the UK, I find that there's the BBC, and there's a lot of independent women working for themselves and doing a lot of different projects. And so how can we strengthen the indie side and connect more women? And so in this phase right now that as we are talking, I'm still trying to decide if I want to do something very chill, maybe in the park, or if we want to do it, maybe partner up with a female-owned or non-binary owned studio here in London. So trying to figure out what that would look like. And I think it's so important to just say, hey, I know maybe a handful of people in town. I want to know more. So let's all meet and chat. And especially doing so much of our work remotely, it's just something that feels really nice to be able to go and talk to other people about the same things over a pint or a non-alcoholic drink, and just commiserate over the hard things and celebrate the good things. So yeah, I think it's super important to do that.
Definitely. That reminds me of one of the things that I loved about podcast show as well, going back to that, was all of these different races, countries, and all of the, like I said, all these genders, they were all there. You go there and you were able to talk to any people, whether they're non-binary, females, males. It's not 100% male-centric, which some people think it is, the podcast industry. It's one of the loveliest things about podcasting is the wealth and the scope that you've got there for the people that it provides for and that provide that programming.
Yeah. And, I think there's also something to be said about collaboration, right? Yeah. And having worked in a lot of environments where maybe I was the only woman in a team, or maybe I was one of the very few, I remember thinking, I want to create and foster an environment where people feel comfortable and approaching, asking for things, asking for help when they need it. And the podcast show shows that, when we all get together, great things happen. And it's for the long term. So we're doing something and we're then realizing oh my gosh, Andrea, I met her last year. She is Andrea Koskai, the founder of the newsletter Aero Waves for European podcasters. And so we've stayed friends ever since. And those kind of connections do stay. And then whenever I think about an opportunity, I think of Andrea and send it her way. And then when she thinks of an opportunity, she will also reach out. And so it's more than just meeting and hanging out. It truly is kind of opportunities that go over that, right? Yeah. Really. And so, it's thinking about the energy of what you want to achieve. And in podcasting is so collaborative. Why not bring it over to the side of just our personal side, right? Take it out of the digital world and bring it into the real world. And I don't know about you, I'm personally an extrovert. So for me, it's really hard to run things only digitally. I want to meet with people. I want to talk about things. I want to help people who are stuck in some situation. It's just we're all stronger together, and it just goes back to that, whether you're in a male dominated industry or not. At the end of the day, I find that we can figure it out. Everybody can Google something, true, but like, why not make it more fun and do it together? I think there's these I don't remember where it is. I know it's one of the countries in Africa that they have this saying that goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I love that so much. And I think that really applies to podcasting. So from your journey, how soon did you start going to podcast conferences or attend meetups, Martin?
That was my first ever podcast event that I've been to. And I mean, I've been podcasting for 6 years now, but yeah, that's the first one I ever went to.
Nice. I mean, very proud of you. Woohoo! Clap, clap, clap. Try not to do that close to the microphone. But it can feel really scary to do your first one. And I think that that's true for podcasting or conferences or meetups. You're like, if I don't take a buddy with me, do I feel like everyone is like clicking, is kind of going back to like high school or something, right? Where everyone has their own friend and you feel like everyone already knows each other. But that's not the truth at all. Everybody has at some point showed up by themselves and just made friends there. And so, it's very important to strengthen your connection to the industry, because it just makes things easier when you know people, when you can reach out to someone and say, hey, I have this goal. Any chance you could help me out on this? So I'm glad that you attended. I think that for many, many people, there's kind of like that perception. You see things online and you think that like, oh, it couldn't be me, or, it's great for other people, but not for me, or I'm still very far in my journey, or what if these people know more? And what if I don't have an answer? And if they're all friends and I'm by myself, like all of these stories that we run in our heads are true. And, so fear keeps us from, this is me putting my coach hat on. Okay. I tell my clients all the time about this, but it once you go once and you get over that initial fear, you go, oh my God, this is so fun. When is the next one? And you get like I say the crash down is real after you've attended the podcast show or a meetup or something. What are my friends all gone? I had the best 2 or 3 days and now they're gone. And now I have to follow up with them on social media. And were so great. And then you just meet up over, like a Zoom call and you catch up, and it helps in between.
It is so funny that you should say that. This is much longer than it was going to be. But it's funny that you should say that, because what happened was, leading up to the podcast show, because I went there from beginning to end.
Yes.
But leading up to it, I'd already arranged to meet up with John McDermott, who is one of the 2 people in charge of Calaroga Sharp Media. And basically almost like a buddy system where we met up with each other and we had each other's backs all the way through it. And then there was somebody else called Silas Vogt, who is a developer. So there were the 3 of us, and I called us the 3 amigos as a bit of a joke.
Oh, cute.
And so we kept up with each other and made sure that we were okay. And afterwards, I've been in touch with them not quite every day, but quite frequently since then. And it's occasionally I'll be on there and I'll go, oh, we've really got to wait until next May to meet up again at the podcast show. It's, these people that you've only met online or listened to, you meet them in person and you make real friends with them, because that's the other thing about podcasting, is that they're a friendly group.
Yeah, we're definitely chatty. But I mean, I've met folks who, I've been in groups where I was like, oh my gosh, I genuinely approach everybody thinking that everybody was going to be super chatty. However, they had their podcast persona that was not at all what they are like in real life. And so they literally were probably very overwhelmed with meeting all people and stuff. And so they were just like giving me 1 to 2 word answers. And I was like, okay. And that was interesting. And so I was like, okay, maybe they just need time. And I'm very overwhelming as an extrovert who's just here trying to like, woohoo, friendly. But I love what you said, because the first conference I went to for podcasting was in Nashville. It was a podcast movement. And it was right after COVID. So it was the first one I think they did after the pandemic. And so everyone was very like, are you social distancing? Especially in the US, it was much more polarizing than it was, I find, here in Europe. So, that was that element. And then the second element was just people were just trying to get back into the socialization again, right? And so I felt that was a really interesting one. And I also found myself a conference husband. So I actually got in touch with Roberto. We connected over the induction process. So we were just like, it was just like introducing yourself and talking about what you do and blah, blah, blah. I was just in the beginning, I was like, oh my gosh, okay. Like we connected because he was living in Panama. And so we stayed in touch. And it is really true that especially Podcast Movement is a conference that lasts 3 days. Or kind of 4. And so the podcast show is just 2, but your social battery will deplete very quickly. And so to go to the point of having the 3 amigos, it's so good because then okay, I know that person. I know we can sit down next to one another in silence and just recharge our social battery. And that is very important, especially if you go to a group and maybe they're doing something and they're doing their own thing and you're like, okay, I don't resonate with them. But then you spot to your other person across the room and you go, okay, that's my friend. And so you feel good. That's a great tip for people. Like, try to get ahead of the conference and connect with folks. Maybe you're from the same region, you have the same interests. And then, there's so many conference meetups. I feel like by the time the conference started, we already had attended like 3 or 4 meetups the day before. Yeah. So that was, by the time it started, we were like, hello again. So yeah, I think definitely that was interesting.
And I ended up crossing off maybe 2/3 of the talks I was going to go into because of meeting up with people and talking with them instead as well.
That is a very good technique, actually, because the podcast show is really hard to attend the different sessions because they're so stacked together. It feels like you're like running from one to the next. You're just like dropping maybe next year or maybe ahead of Podcast Movement, you do your tips of like getting ready for the conference. These are Martin's tips and, try these things if you want to be ready for it.
Anyway, thanks for this. It was lots of fun. I'm sure that people listening got a lot of good information and advice out of both of us there. They get free advice for all of you.
Indeed. Can I plug an episode that I have done, Martin?
Go on.
Okay, perfect. So this is me doing my best work, which is marketing my own stuff. I actually have created a podcast episode about how to maximize attending podcast conferences and how to actually increase your podcast downloads ahead of conferences. So I'll send you the link that hopefully will be in the show notes so people can go ahead and listen, because I have so many strategic ways, especially using apps and social media ahead of the conference, that people are going to be like, oh, that's pretty doable. So I highly recommend that people go listen to that episode.
Brilliant. There you go. There's the sign out for this episode.